The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that made your chest ache. Daniel stood by the doorway, shoulders slumped, staring at the chaos that had become his life. The walls were no longer white, they were canvases of tiny hands' frustrations, scribbles of crayons that refused to stay on paper. Pillows lay torn, books sprawled open with pages ripped, and the faint smell of spilled juice clung stubbornly to the air. 4-year-old Triplets, his pride and his torment, ran in circles around the living room, their energy relentless, their voices sharp and unyielding. Daniel's heart ached as he watched them. Lily, the eldest by mere minutes, shrieked in frustration. As her blocks toppled once more, Chris, fiery and unafraid, threw a toy car across the room, narrowly missing Ethan, who sat silently in the corner clutching a tattered stuffed bear as though it were the only thing keeping him anchored to calm. It had been another day of disaster, another day where he had felt powerless, staring helplessly as every caregiver he hired left within days, unable to withstand the intensity, the chaos, the storm of emotions these children carried inside them. The last nanny had left barely an hour ago, tears streaking her face as she rushed down the driveway, suitcase half-packed, words choked in her throat. "I can't do this," she had sobbed. "They're too much, I'm sorry." Daniel had nodded numbly, the same weary expression etched on his face that had been there for months. He didn't blame her. Who could blame anyone? The Triplets weren't just children, they were little forces of nature, filled with grief, confusion, and a longing for something they could know. Longer name, since the sudden loss of his wife, Emily. The weight of their lives had fallen entirely on him. And now, 2 years later, he was tired of chaos, tired of heartbreak, and tired of feeling that nothing he did could ever be enough. From the kitchen, Grace paused, her knife hovering over the chopping board, the rhythmic sound of rain against the window did little to drown out the noise of crying and anger from the living room. Grace, the family's cook, had been part of the household for years, quietly observing, quietly caring, quietly holding herself at the edges of this storm. She had seen nannies come and go, heard the excuses, witnessed the collapse of patience and spirit, but she had also seen the children's eyes that reflected more than defiance, eyes that held loneliness, confusion, and a depth of feeling that went far beyond mischief. Something inside her shifted. In that moment, she did what no one else had dared to do. She crossed the invisible line from observer to participant. Without hesitation, without announcement, she stepped into the living room. The children froze, momentarily stunned by this unexpected calm in the middle of their storm. Grace did not speak. She did not scold. She did not try to assert control with raised voices or threats. Instead, she knelt to meet them at their level, her hands resting gently on her knees, her eyes soft yet unwavering. Then, almost instinctively, she began to sing, not a bright, cheerful tune or a song from a popular cartoon, but a lullaby she remembered from her childhood, soft and steady, weaving through the chaos like a thread of warmth. It was a song of home, of safety, of small, forgotten joys, the kind of song that reminds you that, even in the darkest moments, there is something worth holding onto. Lily was the first to look up, tears still glistening on her cheeks, her body trembling from the release of frustration. Chris slowed his frantic movements, blinking rapidly as if unsure whether this calm presence was real. Ethan, clutching his bear tightly, lifted his gaze, drawn by the gentle cadence of the voice, feeling, perhaps for the first time that day, a glimmer of peace. Grace didn't rush. She didn't try to solve everything at once. She let the song fill the space, let the rhythm of her words weave through the tension, letting the children feel that someone had not only noticed their pain, but also accepted it fully. For the first time, Daniel felt a shift in the air, a subtle easing of the relentless storm. Something inside the Triplets softened, a crack in the walls they had built around themselves. He watched, unsure whether to hope or fear disappointment. But as Grace continued, moving slowly from one child to another, letting her hands hover in gentle gestures of reassurance, he realized something remarkable. This wasn't about controlling them. This wasn't about discipline or rules. This was about understanding, patience, and courage, the courage to step into a storm no one else had dared to face. And in that moment, Daniel understood something. He hadn't dared to believe, perhaps, just perhaps, this storm could be weathered. Perhaps, with the right heart, the impossible might just be possible. Asterisk the following morning. Sunlight poured gently through the windows, soft and golden, as if the world itself had decided to offer a small gift after the long, relentless storm of yesterday. But inside the Carter household, the calm that lingered was fragile, almost suspicious. Triplets had a way of sensing vulnerability, of testing it, and no one knew this better than Daniel. He had learned to brace himself, to expect the unexpected, to prepare for chaos at every turn. Grace, however, moved through the house with quiet confidence, as if the usual rules did not apply to her. She didn't rush the morning routine or bark orders at the children. Instead, she allowed them to take their time, to wake at their own pace, and even to resist the structure Daniel had tried to enforce for months. Amelia, Chris, and Ethan eyed her suspiciously, half expecting some sudden outburst or harsh command. But Grace met their gazes with patience, nodding calmly, her presence steady, almost magnetic. Breakfast was the first real test. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway as Amelia pushed her plate of scrambled eggs away. With a dramatic sigh, Chris banged his spoon against the table, making a rhythm of defiance, while Ethan poked at his food so gingerly it seemed he might be conducting a delicate experiment rather than eating a meal. Normally, this would have escalated into yelling, tears, and maybe a broken chair. But Grace merely smiled, crouching to meet them at their level, and whispered, "Show me how strong you are this morning." The words were simple, almost unremarkable, but the tone carried weight. It was not a challenge or a threat, it was an invitation. Amelia's frown softened, curiosity piqued. Chris's banging slowed as he considered what it meant to be strong in Grace's eyes. Ethan's careful poking turned into tentative bites, as if he were testing the boundaries of something he hadn't dared to believe existed. Acceptance without judgment. Daniel felt a strange warmth in his chest, one he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't magic, not exactly, but it was something far rarer, understanding. Grace had a way of seeing the children not as obstacles to be controlled, but as individuals brimming with untapped potential, hurt, and resilience. She understood, instinctively, that behind their chaos lay a deep well of emotion, and that what they needed most was not punishment, but guidance, patience, and belief. By mid-morning, the children were engaged in a new kind of play, guided subtly by Grace's presence. Instead of competing to dominate the living room, they built towers together, laughing cautiously, checking with one another before adding another block. There was still mischief. Of course, this was the nature of 4-year-olds, but the mischief no longer felt like rebellion. It felt like exploration, like the first glimmers of trust forming in little hearts that had grown weary of disappointment. Daniel found himself lingering at the doorway, watching, learning. Grace never demanded obedience. She coaxed cooperation. Through empathy, when Amelia refused to share a toy, Grace knelt beside her and gently asked, "Do you want to be the first to help a friend today?" It was a small question, but Amelia's eyes widened as if she had never considered that choice. With a tentative nod, she extended the toy, and Chris's surprised grin was mirrored by Ethan's quiet, contented sigh. Lunchtime brought a new challenge. Chris had a sudden outburst, throwing his chair backward in frustration. Daniel's old instinct screamed at him to intervene with sharp words, to reassert control, to end the chaos before it escalated. But Grace moved forward first. She knelt beside Chris, steady and calm, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "I see how frustrated you are," she said softly. "It's okay to feel upset. Can you show me what you want instead?" Her words, so simple, carried a weight no one else had been able to convey. Chris froze, staring at her, then slowly exhaled and sank into the chair. The tears he had been holding back spilled over, and Grace held space for them, silent but unwavering. When he calmed, he looked up at her, a hint of respect and trust forming in the depths of his eyes. By the afternoon, Daniel could hardly believe the transformation. The triplets, who had once seemed untouchable, were listening, engaging, even laughing together in ways that had been unimaginable. Grace had not promised miracles. She had not demanded perfection. She had offered patience, empathy, and the courage to step into their world and meet them there. And then came the moment that truly changed everything. Ethan, the quietest of the three, approached Grace with his little bear clutched tightly to his chest. "I don't want to be alone," he whispered. Grace knelt, meeting his gaze with the kind of warmth that melted fear and suspicion alike. "You are never alone," she said softly. "I will always be here with you." In that instant, the household shifted. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing that the storm had not been endless after all. The chaos of yesterday remained, certainly, but underneath it was a new rhythm, a rhythm of hope, of possibility, of connection. Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes after months of exhaustion, despair, and relentless struggle. He saw the faintest glimmer of what he had longed for: healing, not just for the children, but for himself. Grace's presence was not a cure-all, not a miracle in the supernatural sense, but it was a force of transformation, subtle yet profound, proving that understanding, patience, and unwavering kindness could achieve what punishment, fear, and frustration never could. The impossible, Daniel realized, was no longer beyond reach. It was unfolding before his eyes, one patient, steady moment at a time, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that tomorrow could be better. That maybe, just maybe, the triplets who had seemed impossible to love could finally feel seen, safe, and cherished, and that perhaps the impossible could become reality with the right heart guiding the way. The next morning arrived with a quiet promise. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting warm, golden patterns across the living room floor, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt a tentative sense of hope. But hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered, especially in a house where 4-year-old triplets ruled the day with energy and emotion far beyond their years. He stood at the threshold, watching Grace move among them with a calmness that seemed almost impossible. In the whirlwind of chaos, Amelia, Chris, and Ethan were already awake, but instead of the usual cries and screams, they were seated on the floor, building a puzzle together. Their concentration was fierce, their tiny hands carefully fitting pieces, their faces a mixture of determination and delight. Daniel blinked, hardly believing his eyes. Just days ago, such a peaceful moment would have seemed unimaginable. But Grace had taught them something far more valuable than obedience or discipline. She had taught them the meaning of trust, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from feeling safe. Grace noticed Daniel watching and smiled gently, a knowing look passing between them. She did not need words. He understood that her presence alone was creating ripples in the triplets' world. Yet, she was far from finished. Today would be a new test, one designed not to control, but to empower. "Who wants to help me in the garden?" she asked softly, her voice carrying through the house like sunlight through the clouds. The triplets paused, glancing at each other with a mix of curiosity and caution. This was unusual. Usually, any request from an adult would be met with resistance, defiance, or outright refusal. But Grace's approach was different, gentle, respectful, and patient. Amelia was the first to move, stepping toward her with careful curiosity. Chris followed, a little slower, eyes darting around for potential threats or reasons to resist. Ethan hung back, clutching his bear, hesitant but intrigued. Grace knelt to meet his gaze. "You don't have to go if you're not ready," she said. "But if you do, I'll be with you the whole time." And with that simple assurance, Ethan nodded. It was a small gesture, but in it lay a monumental step forward. Grace had created a space where they could choose, where they felt safe to explore without fear of punishment or failure. It was a subtle, powerful form of guidance, one that required patience, consistency, and a belief in the children's capacity to grow. Outside, the garden was a canvas of potential. Flowers needed tending, soil needed turning, and sunlight poured over every corner. Grace handed each child a small tool, demonstrating patiently how to dig, plant, and water. She did not scold when mistakes were made. She corrected with kindness, allowing the children to feel competent, capable, and proud of their efforts. Amelia laughed as she dug a small hole too deep. Chris grinned at a puddle he accidentally created. Ethan's eyes widened as he watered a row of tiny seedlings, realizing that his careful touch could make something grow. Daniel watched, heart swelling with a mixture of relief and awe. The transformation he had glimpsed in the living room yesterday was deepening. Growing roots that reached far beyond mere compliance, Grace was nurturing more than behavior. She was nurturing hearts, teaching the triplets how to connect with themselves, with each other, and with the world around them. By midday, the children were exhausted but radiant. They had worked together, shared tasks, and even comforted one another when minor frustrations rose. Grace's influence was evident not only in their actions, but in their expressions. The softness of their faces, the genuine smiles, the laughter that felt spontaneous rather than fleeting. And then came the moment that would linger in Daniel's mind forever. Ethan, the quietest, most withdrawn of the three, approached Grace with a small, dirt-smudged flower clutched in his tiny hand. "I picked this for you," he whispered. Grace knelt, accepting the offering with gentle reverence. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will treasure it always." It was not just a flower. It was a symbol of trust, of connection, of the bonds forming between caregiver and child, and between the children themselves. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. After months of struggle, after years of fear that the chaos would never end, he saw a glimpse of something extraordinary: love, healing, and possibility, all unfolding in real time. The afternoon brought new challenges, of course. Triplets were never without surprises, and Grace faced everyone with the same unwavering patience. When Chris spilled water over the newly planted seedlings, she did not scold or express anger. Instead, she knelt beside him, her voice calm and steady. "It's okay," she said. "Mistakes happen. What can we do to make it better?" Chris paused, thought for a moment, and carefully began to replant the seedlings with Grace's guidance. Amelia struggled with sharing a small spade, and Ethan refused to leave the garden, worried something terrible might happen if he stepped away. Grace addressed each moment with care, never imposing authority, never using fear, but teaching through example, through encouragement, and through the steady presence of someone who truly believed in them. As evening fell, Daniel prepared dinner with a sense of awe. The triplets were no longer screaming, no longer waging battles against the world and everyone in it. Instead, they recounted the day's adventures with excitement and pride, their faces glowing with accomplishment. Grace moved quietly among them, offering guidance when needed, encouragement when deserved, and love at every opportunity. For Daniel, it was more than just relief, it was a revelation. He realized that the storm he had once feared would never end was beginning to calm, not because the children had changed instantly, but because someone had entered their world with understanding, courage, and unwavering belief in their potential. Grace had not performed a miracle in the traditional sense. She had done something far more profound. She had taught the triplets to believe in themselves, to trust, and to see the possibility of good in every moment. As the children drifted to sleep that night, exhausted but content, Daniel stood at the doorway once more, watching Grace gently tuck each child in, whispering words of reassurance and love. He felt a hope he had not dared to feel in years. The impossible, he realized, was not beyond reach. It was unfolding quietly, persistently, beautifully in the hearts of those who dared to believe. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future where chaos could coexist with peace, where the triplets could grow into resilient, loving individuals, and where a broken family could be made whole again, not through force, but through patience, empathy, and the quiet, unstoppable power of someone who refused to give up. The morning light crept through the windows, painting the living room in shades of gold and amber. Yet Daniel felt a knot of tension in his chest. The calm of the past 2 days had been fragile, and he knew better than anyone that triplets had a way of testing every ounce of patience and hope. He watched from the kitchen doorway as Grace moved among them, her presence steady, her movements unhurried. She seemed almost fearless. But Daniel had learned that courage in the face of chaos often came with invisible battles. Amelia was the first to appear that morning, her small face scrunched in concentration, a puzzle piece in hand. Chris followed closely behind, bouncing with energy barely contained, while Ethan trailed, holding his stuffed bear like a shield. The room was alive, buzzing with potential and unpredictability alike. Grace knelt to greet them, her eyes warm, and steady, and whispered, "Today we are going to do something special together." The triplets froze, curiosity replacing the usual skepticism. Grace didn't demand attention. She invited it. She explained that they would plant a small garden along the backyard fence, a project that would require cooperation, patience, and care. Daniel held his breath, knowing full well that any hint of impatience or frustration could cause the entire endeavor to collapse. But Grace was calm, her energy unshakable, and slowly the children began to respond. As they stepped outside, the day unfolded with moments of laughter, struggle, and small victories. Amelia dug carefully, Chris carried soil in a clumsy but determined way, and Ethan watered seedlings with deliberate precision. Grace guided them, gently offering praise not for perfection but for effort, not for obedience but for engagement. The air was filled with the scent of earth, sunlight, and the quiet hum of trust forming in real time. But then the challenge arrived, as inevitable as sunrise. Chris, in a sudden burst of impatience, tripped over a watering can, sending soil flying and knocking over a small row of seedlings. The frustration that had simmered within him for weeks surged outward, and he screamed, stamped his feet, and ran toward the house, leaving Amelia and Ethan frozen in shock. Daniel felt the old instinct to scold, to demand, to regain control rising in his chest, but Grace stayed calm. She followed Chris slowly, her presence soft but insistent, never forcing, never threatening. "I see that you're upset," she said quietly, kneeling to meet him at his level. "It's okay to feel frustrated. Can you show me what you want to do instead?" Chris froze, the storm inside him suddenly meeting the steady wall of Grace's patience. He wanted to lash out, to run, to retreat into anger, but something in her voice held him. Slowly, he exhaled and nodded, picking up the seedlings with trembling hands. Grace stayed beside him, guiding and encouraging, but never taking control. Meanwhile, Amelia, inspired by Chris's gradual calm, began helping to replant the toppled seedlings, while Ethan handed them small tools with careful precision. The three of them worked together, learning to navigate the chaos of mistakes without falling into despair or blame. For Daniel, it was like witnessing a miracle in slow motion, one that required patience, faith, and unwavering belief. By midday, the garden was taking shape, each row of plants a testament not to perfection, but to resilience, cooperation, and newfound understanding. Grace had not only taught the children skills, but had also nurtured their emotional growth. She had shown them how to process frustration, how to help each other, and how to find pride in their efforts, even when things went wrong. Then came a moment that Daniel knew would be etched in his memory forever. Ethan, the quietest of the three, looked up at Grace, his small hand covered in soil, and said, "I didn't think I could do it, but I did." Grace knelt, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "You always could," she said softly. "You just needed to believe in yourself." It was a turning point. The triplets were beginning to see themselves differently, not as impossible to manage, not as failures or burdens, but as capable, resilient, and worthy of trust. And Grace, through her calm presence and unwavering patience, was teaching Daniel the same lesson, that love, empathy, and steady guidance could achieve what fear, punishment, and control never could. As evening approached, the children reluctantly left the garden, dirty and tired but beaming with pride. Amelia chattered about the flowers she had planted. Chris bragged about carrying the heaviest shovel, and Ethan clutched his bear tightly while recounting every careful movement he had made. Daniel watched, heart swelling, realizing that this transformation was not magic in the fantastical sense, but it was a real, tangible miracle born from patience, understanding, and courage. Later, as Grace tucked each child into bed, whispering words of reassurance and love, Daniel felt a sense of awe and gratitude that words could scarcely capture. The impossible, the chaos that had once seemed unending, was beginning to bend to the quiet power of trust, empathy, and belief. The storm had not vanished, but the triplets were learning to navigate it, to find calm within it, and to believe that they could face any challenge together. For Daniel, the lesson was clear. The impossible was not a destination, but a journey guided by someone who refused to give up, who met chaos with patience, and who taught even the most troubled hearts that hope, love, and resilience were always within reach. And as he finally allowed himself to breathe, a quiet, profound sense of hope settled over the household. The impossible was no longer a distant dream, it was unfolding before his eyes, one brave, steady, heart-filled moment at a time. The morning arrived with a quiet tension that even Daniel could feel in his chest. Something in the air hinted at change, though he could not yet name it. The triplets had shown remarkable progress over the past days, their energy tempered with curiosity, their chaos increasingly mingled with cooperation. Yet Daniel knew better than to assume calm meant permanence. Triplets, especially these three, had a way of testing limits, of finding cracks in even the most carefully built walls of patience. And today, Grace would face a test unlike any she had yet encountered. The children woke unusually early, their minds and bodies buzzing with an energy that seemed boundless. Amelia bounced from her bed like a spring, eager to share some imaginary adventure she had dreamed up overnight. Chris appeared at the doorway, fists clenched with determination, while Ethan lingered behind, watching, waiting, the familiar cautiousness in his eyes softened only slightly by curiosity. Grace entered the room quietly, moving as though she had known their every step before they even took it. "Good morning, explorers," she said softly, her voice calm and steady. "Today, we're going on a very special adventure." The triplets froze, exchanging glances. An adventure with Grace was not a command, not a task, but a journey they would choose to join or resist. Today, Daniel thought, they might resist. The plan was simple on the surface: a walk to the nearby park, a chance for the triplets to explore nature, climb, run, and interact with other children. But simplicity rarely existed in their world. The moment they stepped outside, the chaos began. Amelia dashed forward without looking, nearly tripping over a loose stone. Chris, fueled by his competitive spirit, barreled past, knocking over a stroller left by another parent. Ethan lingered, unsure, glancing back at Grace for reassurance. Grace moved swiftly but deliberately, intercepting Amelia and crouching beside her. "Slow down," she whispered. "I want you to notice everything around you. Can you do that for me?" Amelia's initial frown was hesitant, but the tone of Grace's voice, patient yet firm, drew her in. She nodded, small but significant, and began to pay attention to the tiny leaves fluttering in the wind, the smell of the grass, the birds darting between trees. Chris's energy could not be contained so easily. He began to argue, insisting that he needed to run faster, to go further, to conquer the park before anyone else. Grace knelt, her gaze steady and unyielding. "I see your excitement," she said softly. "I love how brave you are, but we need to keep each other safe. Can we find a way to explore without anyone getting hurt?" Chris hesitated, then, for the first time in many mornings, allowed himself to be guided rather than dragging everyone along. Ethan, who had been holding back, finally took a step forward. Grace smiled at him, crouched low, and said, "You are ready. You've been waiting. And now it's your turn to shine." The encouragement was gentle but powerful. Ethan's tentative steps became purposeful strides as he joined his siblings, slowly but confidently finding his place in the unfolding adventure. As they moved through the park, the real challenge emerged. Other children played freely, forming games and friendships that Amelia, Chris, and Ethan had never experienced. Social interactions that seemed effortless for others were fraught with uncertainty and potential conflict for the triplets. Chris grew frustrated when a boy grabbed a toy he wanted. Amelia nearly shouted at another child who took her turn on the swing. Ethan retreated to the edge, clutching his bear, unsure how to navigate the chaos of peers. Grace's presence became the anchor. She guided, encouraged, and modeled behavior without lecturing. She whispered reminders of patience, fairness, and kindness. She acknowledged feelings without judgment. "I see your frustration," she said to Chris. "Can we find a way to share?" To Amelia, she said, "It's okay to be upset. Can we try to take turns?" Ethan, finally reassured by her calmness, tentatively offered his hand to another child, and for a moment, Daniel could hardly believe what he was witnessing. 3 children learning empathy, sharing, and patience in real time, under the gentle guidance of someone who truly understood them. The day was long, filled with small victories and minor setbacks, each moment a test of Grace's resilience and unwavering dedication. She faced tantrums, outbursts, and tears with the same calm determination she had shown from the beginning. At times, Daniel wondered if even she might falter, if the storm of energy and emotion would be too much. But Grace never wavered. She reminded him silently, without words, that transformation required patience, consistency, and an unshakable belief in the children's potential. By late afternoon, the triplets were exhausted but triumphant. Amelia had shared her toys willingly, Chris had learned to wait his turn, and Ethan had interacted with other children without retreating. Grace's guidance had turned what could have been chaos into learning, frustration into growth, and fear into trust. Daniel watched, heart swelling with gratitude and awe, realizing that this was more than caregiving, it was transformation. As they walked home, the children chattered about their day, their energy still palpable but tempered with satisfaction. Grace listened, encouraged, and celebrated each accomplishment, reinforcing not only the lessons of the day, but the underlying message: they were capable, valued, and deserving of patience and love. That night, as Daniel tucked the triplets into bed, he felt a profound shift in his heart. The impossible, the chaos he had once believed could never be tamed, was gradually giving way to growth, understanding, and hope. Grace had not only taught the children to navigate their world, but had shown Daniel that resilience, empathy, and unwavering belief in the heart of a child could achieve what seemed unattainable. And as he closed the door behind her, he whispered softly to himself, "The impossible is no longer beyond reach, it is being built, one brave, patient, loving moment at a time." The morning light spilled through the windows, soft and golden, but Daniel felt a new kind of anticipation in the air. It was different from the anxious mornings of the past, no longer a sense of dread or exhaustion, but a quiet expectation, a feeling that something important was about to unfold. For months, he had watched chaos reign in his home, seen caregivers leave defeated, and struggled to maintain hope. Yet now, standing at the edge of the living room, he could feel that the impossible was no longer distant, it was happening. Right here, right now. The triplets were awake, their energy palpable, but it was tempered with something new: purpose. Amelia, Chris, and Ethan moved through the morning with a mix of excitement and care, no longer acting out of defiance, but exploring the world around them with curiosity and intention. Grace was already there, guiding, encouraging, and gently challenging them, her calm presence anchoring their day. Daniel watched in awe as the children laughed together, solved minor conflicts on their own, and expressed themselves with clarity and confidence that had seemed unimaginable just weeks before. Grace had planned something special for this day, though Daniel did not yet know what it would be. The children were invited to the backyard, where a small stage had been set up, a place for them to showcase what they had learned, not just in skills but in trust, cooperation, and resilience. The triplets approached it with curiosity and hesitation. For a moment, Amelia's confidence faltered, Chris's energy threatened to overwhelm, and Ethan's cautious nature whispered that he should retreat. Grace knelt beside them, her eyes soft and steady. "Today," she said, "you will show the world what you can do, not because you have to, but because you can. I will be with you every step of the way." Amelia was the first to step forward, placing a hand on her brother and sister as if to say, "We can do this together." Chris's competitive streak softened into determination, and Ethan, bolstered by Grace's quiet encouragement, stood tall beside them. Daniel felt a lump in his throat as he realized the magnitude of the transformation before him. These were the same children who had once screamed, lashed out, and withdrawn from the world. Now, they were stepping forward with courage, ready to engage, ready to shine. The performance began small. Amelia recited a poem she had written with Grace's guidance, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger with every word. Chris demonstrated a series of exercises, showing focus and control he had never displayed before. Ethan, with quiet determination, led a small group activity, encouraging cooperation and sharing among his siblings. Each child, in their own way, revealed not only newfound skills, but the deeper lessons Grace had instilled: patience, empathy, confidence, and resilience. Daniel watched, tears brimming, as neighbors and friends who had come to observe clapped and cheered. This was not about perfection. It was about growth, effort, and heart. Grace had taken 3 children who had seemed impossible to guide, impossible to understand, and impossible to help, and had shown them and everyone around them that patience, love, and unwavering belief could transform even the most challenging hearts. After the demonstration, the triplets ran to Grace, wrapping their arms around her in a spontaneous embrace. She smiled, hugging each of them, whispering words of encouragement and pride. "You did it," she said softly. "I knew you could." The children beamed, their faces glowing with accomplishment, trust, and joy. For Daniel, it was overwhelming. This was the moment he had longed for, the proof that healing was possible, that chaos could be met with patience and love, and that even the most turbulent hearts could find peace and courage. As the day faded into evening, Daniel sat quietly on the porch, watching Grace tuck each child into bed one last time for the night. The house, once filled with constant noise, destruction, and despair, now radiated warmth, safety, and love. He realized that Grace had not only transformed the children, but had also transformed him. He had learned to let go of fear, to embrace patience, and to trust that love, guidance, and empathy could achieve what strict rules and discipline never could. The triplets, now sleeping soundly, were no longer just children who tested limits. They were resilient, confident, and capable individuals beginning to understand their own worth. And Grace, with her quiet courage and unwavering belief, had shown that the impossible was never truly impossible. It was simply waiting for someone brave enough to meet it, patient enough to nurture it, and kind enough to believe in it. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt peace. He understood that the journey had been long and difficult, but the destination, a home filled with trust, love, and hope, was worth every step. And as he drifted to sleep that night, he carried with him a profound truth: the impossible can be achieved, not through force, but through patience, empathy, and the unwavering belief in the hearts of those who need it most. Tomorrow, the triplets would wake, eager and curious, ready to face new challenges. But Daniel knew with certainty that no matter what storms lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger, braver, and more resilient than ever before. The impossible had been reached, and it had begun not with grand gestures, but with quiet courage, patient guidance, and the steadfast belief that every heart, no matter how turbulent, could be nurtured to bloom. Asterisk.